Hi everyone, and welcome to Hit the Apex this week. Sorry, voice a little squeaky at the moment, but welcome to Hit the Apex this week, following the Russian Grand Prix, but it almost seems a bit secondary at this point to all the other things going on. We've got the Bathurst 1000 on this weekend to talk about. We've got the footy grand finals from last week as well that we're going to recap, and I think we're okay, Baden. We're not going to choke up here after the outcome of the weekend. Yeah, I think
nothing that theatrical. It was a bit heartbreaking, but all things considered, pretty good job. You've got to look at it from an objective point of view, so dust ourselves off and live to fight another day.
Yeah, well, glad we can talk about it and reflect anyway later on, but let's talk about F1 first anyway, because we're in the midst of another doubleheader, of course, the Russian Grand Prix. Probably memorable for all the wrong reasons, you could say. Unfortunately, which is seems to be the case in the last few races this year anyway. So Lewis Hamilton moving a step closer to a fifth world championship, following, I guess, the win which was gifted to him strategically by Mercedes. He's got an unassailable 50-point lead now and a third straight win this year too, and that was all despite Valtteri Bottas having pole position, and it was all down to an instruction that came from the team to protect effectively the championship lead, which if Lewis didn't finish first and finish second and Sebastian Vettel finished third, it would have been still a 43-point lead, but Mercedes thought they had to protect him in the lead and push it out to 50 points. So yeah, that was probably the biggest talking point over the weekend was Valtteri Bottas, again, the wingman.
Oh, really, when you look at Mercedes, I've never seen this before. They're getting creative. Who would have thought that Bottas maybe would actually be, for once, fourth or fifth time this year on for a victory. Just fall into line, just take 2 seconds off, back up into Vettel, go on to an alternate strategy, whatever it might be. And Hamilton, as much as he's dominated really since around Germany, as much as that's been the case, Bottas has been so compliant that it's just fallen into place for them. And Ferrari, we know about their own issues, and it's just not a good look all around, and really just capped off what was a forgettable weekend. From my point of view, there's very little to discuss. It's just getting to a point where disillusionment's pretty high. Yeah,
regardless of that, though, it just seems that, Bottas consigned to that role once again, and how many times has he lost the opportunity to win a race this year? It's almost countless. I think China, Austria, Baku, Austria if he didn't have the DNF, then of course Hungary as well, so plenty of opportunities go begging there for Bottas. But looking back at the race, so it was on the 26th lap, that we saw the position change. It was after they had their one-stop pit stop to switch over to the soft tyres, and they were sort of threatened by Max Verstappen running long into the first stint. He was leading the race at that stage after starting from the rear. Sebastian Vettel and Ferrari, for once, were able to undercut Lewis Hamilton, and successfully as well, and that left, I guess, Hamilton a bit unamused, but wasted no time in passing it. And that's, I guess, the story of the weekend, is how toothless Ferrari looked in comparison to Mercedes, who were on it throughout the whole weekend, and Hamilton wasted no time to pass Vettel to get that position back. So
probably the first weekend for the entire season where Mercedes has been clinical, as much as we saw from qualifying at Singapore that they were in a league of their own. At least Hamilton this time out, they just on a different page altogether, and you do wonder if Ferrari's essentially thrown the towel in.
Well, France was also similar to that, where they were unassailable the whole weekend, but whether Ferrari have thrown the towel in and whatnot, Sebastian Vettel with his body language too just doesn't seem the same after the last few races, so who knows as far as this championship is concerned, what the outcome. Well, we know what the outcome is, but can something change it? Who knows? But Max Verstappen, he was arguably probably the most entertaining part of the race in a good sense, because he was up to sixth from the rear of the grid in the opening lap. So again, engine penalties putting Red Bull down in the order.
Red Bull and Renault and McLaren and half the grid starting at the rear.
Yeah, quarter of the grid to half the grid, basically starting from the rear, leaving qualifying as being a damn squib because no one wanted to go out. So, because of that, let's all change qualifying as well, as they've been talking about. Let's introduce Q4 or whatever. It's because these engine penalties is what's taking away from the spectacle, not because the format is maligned or whatever. But anyway, so he led the race, did Max, but then finished sixth after the one and only pit stop he had, and there was talk that perhaps despite how quick he was and then being on that fast tyre at the end of the race, it was just a matter of conserving that engine, that new power unit that they put in the car. So that's why he didn't really make a charge towards the end, as everyone would have liked to have seen. So he had to contend with sixth. Kimi Raikkonen alone in P4. That was the story of his race and Ferrari's race. Ricciardo, great for him to finish fifth as well from the rear of the grid, doing the same thing that Max did, that long soft stint at the start. But yeah, just looking at the top three again, I guess I've never seen a more unhappier podium than in Russia, with Valtteri Bottas, of course, upset with the team and everything with the outcome. Russia's a track he's never been out-qualified by a teammate before, and generally he's been pretty strong on race day too. So what was pretty much a guaranteed win at his best circuit, they've pretty much engineered to favour his teammate. And, do you take any crumb of comfort from when Lewis Hamilton says, that I didn't deserve that win or whatever? Like, he'll still be pretty grateful that he got those extra 7 points or whatever, regardless of what he came out and said ultimately to the audiences.
It's cold comfort. We know Bottas's position, as much as he really spent the first third of the season arguably as the superior Mercedes driver. Hamilton did seem a bit adrift, probably until he got those victories under his belt at Azerbaijan and Spain. And for Bottas, these body blows, you wonder what it's going to do to his psyche in the long term, and that frustration when you see him come into the pits and not so subtly manoeuvre that number 2 board. He's clearly keeping his mouth quiet when it comes to the remarks, but internally he must just be boiling. And you have to think at this point, if Hamilton's so comfortable with this lead, if they're not going to let Bottas win at this point of the season, when Ferrari back in 2002, whenever it might have been, it was in the first third of the year when there was still a lot up for grabs, I think that Bottas is going to wonder if he's ever going to be given a chance.
Yeah, the Finns basically this year have been winless, and for those reasons as well. So what does it do for Bottas in the long term? As you say, it's pretty damaging, you could say. And, even being with the best team on the grid, he won 3 races last year. He had 2 pole positions this year as well, but it's just, not really come together for whatever reason, and especially being engineered as well to favour the other driver. That's, from a sporting perspective, it's not the best thing to see. Like, I'm sure everyone would have felt the same and whatnot. And when you look at the end, when we look back at this championship at the end of the year, we might say, well, what was that, that 7 point buffer or whatever between first and second, it almost didn't make a difference. So, still 50 points for Lewis Hamilton. It's almost it is 2 race wins in excess of Vettel. So there's going to be a whole lot that has to go wrong for Hamilton now for Vettel to claw back those points. So Bottas ultimately loses out because, what was a guaranteed win for him just got stripped.
At this point, you'll see the piecemeal victory perhaps at Abu Dhabi, when it's a clinic from Mercedes, as it's been so often since 2014. And for what it's worth, that won't be one where you can look back and say, oh, well, Bottas here dominant. You'll know that Mercedes have just given him some sort of salute for a year of pain. And from Ferrari's point of view, you do look at it now, and that lead could easily double the way it's going. The wheels might just fall off altogether, and you honestly couldn't wait for this year to wrap up the way it's going. It's really got very striking similarities to 2013 when we had that close battle and we thought Ferrari finally they're going to nail it, and that never eventuated. And On that occasion, Vettel 1-9 on the bounce. This time, there's a good chance Hamilton will come close to winning 8 out of 9 as it stands. It's hard to see Mercedes dropping another race of the remaining 5.
Yeah, you probably could argue that Red Bull are closer to a win or whatever somewhere like Mexico or Brazil if the weather goes crazy as well. But moving it on, I guess, team orders was the story of the Russian Grand Prix, and Force India as well had to a sort of lesser degree than Mercedes had. So they had a few position swaps between Perez and Ocon. Kevin Magnussen made himself a bit of a wall in P8. They struggled to pass him, and then Perez on the radio saying, "Can you let me ahead of Ocon so I can have a go?" And because of the dramas in Singapore, they had to change their rules of engagement, and basically they're not allowed to fight each other. But, strategically, it's like, oh, well, can you let Perez pass to have a go at Magnussen? You've got 3 laps to pass, Kevin. If you don't do that, hand the position back to Ocon. So they played the race pretty safe, you could say. Force India, they scored, P9 and P10 and got some points on the board, which is probably more critical for them, given that they had their points stripped and they've got to fight back. And they're being, I guess, optimistic in targeting McLaren where they are to finish in the Constructors' Championship. And I think they're 20 points or something behind. And given where McLaren are at the moment, I clearly see Force India perhaps catching up to them before the end of the season. But yeah, great race from Magnussen instead for 8th for Haas or whatever. But a lot of criticism as well that he's, moving around a lot and trying to just basically blocking like he shouldn't be.
It's been a bit of a narrative for the entire season when you date it back to Azerbaijan. A lot of acrimony, and you can see that he's clearly developing quickly, but he's got a pretty brash style. And as far as that goes as well for Perez, his history certainly gets his elbows out, so it was refreshing to see him this time playing the team game and knowing his position. Sure, the law was laid down by Otmar Zafnauer following Singapore there, and they know what's at stake as far as requeuing the points to that, you could argue, rightful position they were in before they had to start from scratch at Belgium.
Yeah, exactly. So getting those points back is probably the most important thing at this stage. And, again, 9th and 10th, a good result for those guys. Lonely 7th for Charles Leclerc too, who actually... I guess it was overlooked. He scored Sauber's best qualifying result in the hybrid era. So they were 7th. He finished 7th in the end. So great for him. He just continues to go from strength to strength. And, we talk about riding off this year now and not really, just looking forward to next year and everything. And Leclerc's probably that thing, the next big thing you got to say in that Ferrari seat. Vettel, I guess, just tripping over himself for the whole year, or for the most part of the year now. So is Leclerc Ferrari's next best thing, as far as winning a championship is concerned? And it's pretty damning, I guess, to talk about Vettel in that way, because, he came over from Red Bull off the back of 4 championships, and, he was touted as being the next Schumacher and also just part of that Ferrari revival, and it's just gone really nowhere, you could say, since he came in 2015. So does Leclerc's arrival next year mark the start of what will be a new era for Ferrari and also an era of championships?
When the season started and that initial talk was there of Leclerc joining from next season, with Vettel really looking quite dominant the early races, you thought Leclerc will come in and spend a few years finding his feet, and that little umming and ahhing period where we thought it would be status quo with Raikkonen remaining and Vettel would be the alpha dog. But as it stands now, Vettel just losing his way for a second season on the bounce. Vettel's really got first few races of 2019, and if Leclerc does what Hamilton did with Alonso, I don't think there'll be any issues from Ferrari's upper management to say go for it, and that could be his chance gone. And you do sense that Vettel's frustrations and all this talk about him calling the shots from the cockpit for strategy and whatnot, things could come to a head pretty quickly if Leclerc's on his game from the outset.
Yeah, and that could create tension, and ultimately, we know how Vettel responds when having a strong teammate. 2014 is probably that key season, if not, the time spent with Mark Webber, but 2014 when Daniel Ricciardo came in and basically made mincemeat of the reigning world champion, a reigning 4-time world champion as well. So, do Ferrari lose patience with Vettel, or is it Vettel that loses patience with Ferrari? That's going to be one of the big things to look at next year. So
Alonso lasted 5 seasons, and it was 2 seasons short of his contracted tenure, so there's every chance Vettel, and you see in Formula 1 contracts are broken routinely, so stranger things have happened. Could he yet be on his way out if Ferrari sees Leclerc as its future?
Yeah, exactly. So that's plenty to look forward to in that respect. But drivers of the day, hard to go past Verstappen for this one. Just carving up the field circuit where they say overtaking's not very difficult. I think he just put on a masterclass, and to finish 6th in the end, I guess we would have hoped he would have been on the podium, but 6th, I guess, is still a good result for Red Bull. And I guess it's, what can you really expect from Red Bull going into the end of the year? Like, yeah, they're talking about Mexico, possibly a race win there, but it's just mark time basically. They're just marking time before they end this partnership with Renault and look forward to next year where they get a new driver in Pierre Gasly and also Honda power as well.
A bit of a shame for Ricciardo on this occasion. His best result essentially since Hungary, that great gritty drive to 4th, and how long ago it seems a triumphant victory at Monaco. But when you look at the way he had some damage at the start there, and people saying he's way off the pace, he's nowhere near where Verstappen is. He ultimately finished ahead of him, and they're just saying, he's got nothing to match him, and credit's got to be given to him. He's been so afflicted by reliability probably about 80% of the time since Monaco that just wants to draw a line under it and start afresh.
Yeah, well, no podium since Monaco ultimately, and front wing damage as we saw, and then he had to have that front wing replaced, which then ultimately he got the pace back. So, what does he look forward to over the next 5 races or whatever that he's got left under the Red Bull umbrella as well? And I'm guessing he was a very happy man, of course, with the football outcome, but we'll talk about that a bit. We'll talk about that a bit later. So let's move it on to Japan now. So it just seems like this whole year has been built around double headers, triple headers, and again we found ourselves, I think this is the second last, there's one more double header to come with Austin and Mexico in a couple of weeks time. But Japanese Grand Prix could be a damn squib for all we know as far as the race weekend is concerned.
Well, it's certainly secondary to other events, as it's been the case in previous years.
Of course, the clash between Japan and Bathurst, always annoying for us Aussies here. But there's a typhoon alert out, as there always seems to be every second year in Japan. So 5 races remain, hope fading for Ferrari. What if a typhoon just wipes out the entire race or whatever, and we don't have a race? We saw it happen at Silverstone with the MotoGP last month, where they actually ended up cancelling the race on Sunday, so that round was effectively rubbed out and 25 points goes begging for the championship contenders. So what if that happens this weekend? I'm not going to put my money on it, but I've put it out there that potentially it could be a possibility.
Knowing Ferrari's luck, they'll dominate the weekend, barnstorming drive to pole, then the typhoon will hit, and that'll be another chance gone, and effectively 50 points with 4 races left. It'll be almost mathematically off the table, and I guess from the perspective of Bathurst, we'll talk about soon, it probably wouldn't be a great loss from where we're standing because it's more like an obligation to watch this race when it sits alongside. As much as Formula One's what the year's about, it really does pale in contrast.
Yeah, exactly. Having Japan on, I think it's at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which is still in that last 2 hours of the Bathurst race as well. But given what happened here in 2014 and the tragic outcome of that race with Jules Bianchi, of course, they should probably be a bit more cautious about the weather and the conditions as well, and I reckon they'd probably lean towards, if they had to, ultimately can the race if need be. But they've got that window. If they can start a bit later and avoid the typhoon, that would be beneficial for everyone, I guess. But it's Japan, another fortress for Mercedes since 2014. 3 out of 4 wins in that time for Hamilton here. He's equal with Vettel with 4 wins in total, and then when you look at Ferrari's record here, they've not won since 2004. So really, probably a couple of months ago, you would have said Suzuka would have been a great circuit for Ferrari given the strength of their car. But given the demonstration in Russia from Mercedes, you almost doubt that, they're going to get anywhere near.
There are some similar characteristics. You could say some of those sweeping turns of Russia to Suzuka, so there's every chance Mercedes will run a pretty similar package here. And Ferrari, we probably forget, they've still got to take some of those power unit penalties at some point, where Mercedes cycled through those earlier in the piece. So it doesn't bode well that between here or that altitude factor of Mexico, something's going to give for the Ferraris.
Yeah, exactly. And where you expect them to be strong, they're just not delivering and whatnot. So, Mercedes had the better car in Russia. Can Ferrari respond with upgrades? Is there even any point bringing upgrades now? Do they look forward to 2019?
They're bringing an upgrade, that's right. On the decals, they're bringing their new Philip Morris endorsed sponsor. That'll power them another 100 bhp.
Yeah, go faster stripes or whatever, put that onto the car. So, yeah, 2017, it was a DNF for Sebastian Vettel, and that pretty much ended his title hopes back then. And we saw with Hamilton winning that race, it was a 59-point lead in the championship he had, and then 2 races later in Mexico he ended up clinching the title. So really he's going to have to look at a Hamilton DNF this weekend to even have the faintest of hopes. Like, even if he wins the race, Hamilton's got to not score points or have a DNF for the title to sort of be back on. But given what's happened in recent races, we wouldn't be counting on it, would we?
I'm anticipating the way things are going, Hamilton will win the championship with 3 races to spare. So is it Austin or is it Mexico first this year? It's US, isn't it?
Yeah, Austin will be first, and he's clinched the title there before back in 2015. So don't count on it being, do not count it out that it'll happen again this year.
Just the way, really, Ferrari needs to win and Hamilton needs to not score any points just for it to be back to anything resembling a championship. And Hamilton, as they keep mentioning, can cruise to P2 or even P3 at this point and still have it in the bag. That's how much leverage he has.
But as we saw in Russia, that could have been the case in Russia, but as we saw, Mercedes still changed those positions just so Hamilton can win and put the lead out to 50. So if they're still going to adapt that same mentality, then forget even Bottas trying to win a race. Mercedes are going to keep throttling Ferrari and just win every race if they can. So, there's not much hope in that sense. But if the weather is a bit topsy-turvy and if we do end up racing on Sunday, Red Bull, they've taken their engine penalties, hopefully the last time this season. So could they be up in the mix in Japan? Like, they were pretty dominant back in the V8 era with Sebastian Vettel winning 3 of the 4 races back 2010 and 12, 13. So, they could potentially be on to have a good weekend as well.
They will, and even with their perhaps reversion to the newer spec PU, can still sense there'll be some heartbreak in the offing, particularly for Ricciardo. It seems as though one or the other is being addled by it, and probably Russia, the only reason they avoided it was because they took the hit earlier on, but it does seem as though there's some inherent flaws in that Renault.
Yeah, exactly. So, if it comes apart, tough luck for them. But Honda, it's their home race, first race for them back at home without McLaren being a partner, and McLaren basically abusing him on track, or Fernando Alonso publicly abusing him on track or whatever. So they're actually the title sponsors of the event. So it's the Honda Japanese Grand Prix. So I wonder if that's a little thing to rub a bit of salt into the McLaren wound there, who've not been doing well anyway this season. But yeah, they're looking at bringing a engine upgrade this weekend for Toro Rosso. So, if all goes well, they could have a new power unit in the car, new engine and whatnot, and basically just show them what their capability is heading into next year, and whether it'll please the eye of Helmut Marko and Red Bull as well.
Very clever.
That's probably a nice little taster for next year if they have a good package this weekend.
Could be called ground zero for that Red Bull relationship here. You probably see a lot of civilities in the hospitality unit as they form the basis for things to come. So Honda will want to acquit itself well with a good result through Toro Rosso, and Red Bull probably wanting to to really snooze up with them and make sure that they get things off to the best possible start. And again, that finish on at Abu Dhabi for all those parties, especially for Renault, the acrimony which has come across since that championship run ended in 2013. They're both looking for the exit.
Yeah, exactly. And we did see pictures of the Toro Rosso drivers at the factory for Honda in Sakura earlier in the week. So, I guess buttering each other up ahead of next year. But I still get that feeling that next year, given Red Bull's history with engine manufacturers in the past, that things could get a bit salty if Honda don't deliver. And, what's the difference between... There'll be no difference between how McLaren treated them and also with Red Bull. Red Bull, if anything, probably more saltier when it comes to relationships than McLaren was back with Honda last year and the years before.
Give it till second practice at Australia, and if they're not P2,
I don't give it till second.
Over.
I don't give it till second practice. I give it to second day of testing next year in Barcelona, and already it will be like a repeat of McLaren's 2017.
Oh, Cyril, do you mind if we come back and use the Renault power unit? We realised a mistake now.
I don't picture Helmut being of the begging type anyway. He might hold Cyril to ransom. If you don't give me these Renault power units back, then I will shoot your dog or something like that. But anyway, enough of F1. So yeah, hopefully, what can we expect? Hamilton DNF, Hamilton scores no points, and Vettel wins. That's probably the best outcome for the championship. But otherwise, if it's another Mercedes masterclass, then expect by Austin or even mathematically Mexico is probably the location again for Hamilton to wrap things up. So yeah,
either way, end of October, it looks like it's going to be in Hamilton's clutches.
Yeah, championship over in October. So the other thing happening in October, happening this weekend, is the Bathurst 1000. So it's probably the race, as we've talked about all podcasts so far, that we're more excited about. And yeah, it's going to be a huge one this year, given the way that the championship is going as well. And it almost seems that the championship's a bit secondary this weekend, even though there's 300 points on the cards for whoever wins Bathurst. But yeah, it's the individual glory of winning the Bathurst 1000, which is more important. So yeah, do you look after your championship or do you want to win Bathurst? And given that both championship contenders this year have not won a Bathurst 1000 before, where will their loyalties be? And we've heard Shane Van Gisbergen already say that championship's more important for him than winning Bathurst at this stage. So he did that. He had that same mentality in 2016, where he was runner-up in the race to Will Davison and John O'Webb, and he went on to win the championship ultimately. So yeah, what do you decide when it comes to that?
There's probably more impetus on those who have won a title in the past and perhaps haven't had the ultimate success at Bathurst. You can see Van Gisbergen and McLaughlin have come really close, either qualifying or race day. And I guess 2014, 2015 was it? Van Gisbergen, with about 8 laps to go, he stalled it, and that was devastating for him. And then last year for McLaughlin, he came so close to the title, so he'll be in lieu of the fact as well that he's probably been off his game the last few races, will be being a little bit more conservative. And as much as you'll want to win here, you'll see that bigger picture. He'll still want that title as much as victory here is something huge. And for someone like a Win Cup, say, I think you can see him prioritising a win here when he's been 7-time champion, and it's eluded him so many times in previous years, possibly for his own making. Maybe he's been a little bit stubborn and obnoxious in carrying on defying team orders. Maybe this time he'll just go all out and try and make this his priority for the season.
Well, the way we saw Sandown from Triple Eight and Win Cup and Dumbrell in particular, it's a great taster for what to expect at Bathurst. But even they can go out and dominate Sandown like they have in previous years, but then Bathurst is a completely different game altogether, because you've got so many variables that can disrupt their races.
You don't just go out and have a processional 160 lap
yeah,
race.
so as we saw in 2016, wasn't it, where Win Cup Dumbrell led for like 100 laps or whatever processionally, but then in the last 61 laps, we have one safety car, then one safety car ultimately breeds another safety car, and then chaos. Then he ended up, the red light on the safety car light that he missed or something? No, that was in 2015. But yeah, something happened again to his chances in 2016. So, and then last year ultimately having some tyre failure as well. So, they'll be looking at trying to just have a clean weekend, but it's very hard at Bathurst. But one thing that they'll look forward to is the fact that Sunday weather-wise is going to be clear. Saturday too, for the top 10 shootout, which is always exciting. But yeah, between the championship contenders, as you were saying before, the target, if they're not going to be going for the win, if they're not in the position to win, it's going to be about actually just finishing the race. Because what happened to McLaughlin last year is that he was not classed as a finisher; it was a DNF, which means he didn't score points. And with supercars as well, you score points all the way down to last place. So it's going to be about actually just being classed as a finisher, and scoring those points, because ultimately I think it might have been those points that he lost in Bathurst that cost him in Newcastle at the end of the year.
Wasn't much. It was 7 points or something to that effect.
Yeah, so even if he had 7 points in the bag at Bathurst, it could have been a different game come Newcastle. But yeah, so it's about finishing the race more or less just to score those points if you're thinking about your championship. But yeah, if you're in that position at the end of the race with, say, 50 laps to go or whatever in the final stint to be in contention for the win, then of course you're going to go out all guns blazing. And 2016 with Whincup was when he crashed into McLaughlin, into the chase, and took out Garth Tander as well. So 3 contenders for the win there ultimately eliminated, and we saw the acrimony there in the fallout.
It does seem more often than not that an unlikely source is on top. We had Davison and Webb in 2016, and last year we had Reynolds and Luke Youlden. So chances are that the main contenders for the title end up minor place contention rather than outright victory, and you'd think this occasion there's always some spite in those closing laps just when you think they're settling down. One bit of hot-headedness and there's chaos. There's always a safety car that throws strategy out the window.
Yeah, come those, we've even seen Craig Lowndes guilty of it, I guess, back in 2014 where he spun Winterbottom around going into turn 1 towards the end of the race. So, that could have been another Bathurst in the bag for him. And I guess a special race too for CL because it's his final Bathurst as a full-time driver. Can he record a 7th win before he steps into the co-driver role next year, and then he'll be within 2 Bathurst wins away from equaling Brock's record, so that will be quite special for him. But also a special race for Ford because it's the last time that the Falcon will race at Bathurst too. And you look at the Falcon in history, such a long history for that particular model at Bathurst, and I guess the FGX has not won a Bathurst 1000. The previous model won 2 in a row going back to 2013 and 14 for FPR. So, can they send the Falcon out on a high note too with a victory between Tickford, I guess, DGR Penske and also the Milwaukee racing team?
As crazy as it sounds, this might be whatever you want to call them, FPR, Pro Drive, Tickford these days, their best chance to break the duck. It just seems as though you mightn't have form across standard events, but it's so unique here that if you have the right package on the day and you just keep it out of the wall and you're anywhere in the top 5 with 20 laps remaining, then you're as good a chance as anybody. Yeah,
well, they do have 3 Bathurst winners in their camp, so with Mostert, Winterbottom, and of course Steve Owen too. So, has Steve Owen won Bathurst? I don't think so, actually. So, yeah, between Winterbottom and Mostert, I guess, you've got some high-level operators there. And I guess a poignant race too this year with the passing of the 4-time Bathurst winner Bob Jane only last week. So amongst all the footy finals and everything, that bit of news came out. So his battle with cancer, unfortunately, being lost there. So, Bob Jane, a legend of Australian touring cars and the Bathurst event as well. So there will be a fair bit of emotion around that this weekend too, I'm sure.
Yeah, very fitting that it did coincide within a week of the great race, and you hope that the spectacle that's put on come Sunday is fitting of his memory.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it's just going to be one of those weekends where, it's just going to be so, who wins, you can't really predict it. It's just basically waiting till those final laps, you could say, come Sunday to see who's in contention and whatnot. And, you know, we enjoyed certainly last year the David versus Goliath battle, but because Erebus won this minnow team and everything, and it was a monumental win in David Reynolds' career, and also for Erebus Motorsport as a team, with given their history. So, you know, can we see something like that happen again this year? Will Triple Eight have a masterclass? Can Craig Lowndes, you know, add another chapter to his increasing history book as well here? So, you know, a lot of storylines and narratives to play out, and that's the best part about Bathurst, is that it's just, you know, the whole, just, you know, thinking about it sends shivers up your spine and everything, and looking at, you know, classic images, whether you're reading through old books or reading old articles or watching old footage or whatever. It's just, yeah, one of those racetracks that just has an aura about it, which you don't get at a lot of tracks around the world.
And each edition, every year, there's a different story to tell that will be written into folklore, and it's almost hard to keep up when you go through the books. It almost blends into one. It's just this mythical monster, and when you never know, in 50 years' time, people will look back on this, and it's going to be up there as some, not just in terms of motorsport, but as far as general events, it's just something else altogether.
Yeah, well, given Australian sport, the Australian sporting calendar, everyone views Bathurst as not even being a supercars event even. It's just like a standalone day in the year, like a footy grand final or whatever, or rugby grand final, or a Boxing Day test match or whatever, where it's a standalone event, and, you know, it's just celebrated by everyone rather than just race fans. So that's, I guess, the great thing about it. So, you know, we look forward to it again this year, and yeah, just watching first practice this morning, it was just like, oh, you know, it's that time of year again. I'm so excited, you know, look forward to it now, given that it's already here.
And as is so often the case, blink and you miss it and it's all over, so you've got to go along for the ride, and as you see, the most unpredictable outcomes often come to pass.
Yeah, so plenty on then this weekend as far as the racing is concerned, and also with Bathurst as well, there's going to be a fair bit of content on my end to put out across the weekend too, so stay tuned for that as well. So let's get rid of the racing now to talk about footy for the last time this year. It's hitting the post as always, and our grand final review. So I guess it was a bit of a, not a fizzer across both codes, but probably not the outcomes that we would have personally desired, but more so for you, given the AFL, with West Coast snatching the thriller of a game from the Magpies, and in the end it was just over a goal that separated it.
Under a goal,
that separated the outcome 79-74, and, you know, the last quarter was probably one of the most exciting that we've seen in ages, and I guess the whole game itself was pretty thrilling. It was not the blowout that you foresaw coming into it.
Oh, I'd never say I thought Collingwood never had a chance or vice versa, but it probably it's one of those grand finals that was needed. A few years gone by, it's been almost over at the first break, and it did seem for a time there it might have been in Collingwood's favour, but the game was very much the first 20 minutes and the rest, with the West Coast probably were superior when they kicked the last two goals of that first term for the rest, and it was amazing that the lead that Collingwood had was so narrow from that point, West Coast whittling it away, and they were holding on to it until 2 minutes remaining, and that was all that it came down to. One kick, one goal, and West Coast by the barest of margins, and just exhilarating stuff, really. You can see just how tight it was in terms of in defence. It was really played a lot on West Coast terms, and from a objective perspective, as much as you're devastated to lose as a Collingwood supporter, you can't ask for much more from a grand final, and going back to the start of the year, definitely wasn't anything on the equation. To make finals was a great step, and to get within a kick of a premiership would have been something else, but still have to be satisfied with that spectacle.
Yeah, so from just a objective perspective, and the game itself was pretty exciting and everything as well, but yeah, like plenty to build on towards next year for your lot. So yeah, hopefully there's a lot of positives to take away from that as well. But yeah, just given that, over recent years we've had those establishment teams coming back towards the top of the table, and, we talked about it in the lead up into the final as well, that, given the acrimony around the coach's tenure and everything over the past few years, and then building this new team from scratch essentially, and basically I think probably all but a couple of players were playing their first ever grand final in AFL, so getting that exposure and being in that spotlight and those moments, it was pretty crucial. And I guess West Coast, perhaps their experience, given that they were in the 2015 grand final if I'm correct, and been blown out by Hawthorn that year, I guess there would have been a lot of wounds from that they were looking to close up, and they did a good job at the end of the day. But Collingwood did a pretty good job too, which was good to see.
Well, West Coast deserving victors, and if Richmond weren't, then West Coast certainly were the team of the year, and when they needed to, they got it right pretty flawlessly across that final series. And to travel over to Melbourne again, really all that talk about the higher team getting home ground advantage, they did it the hard way in that regard, so there's no disputing their worthiness.
Yeah, exactly. So looking over to the other side of the pond now, and I guess the NRL Grand Final was a complete blowout, and it was the Sydney Roosters who blew the former premiers out to win 21-6 with only one try being scored by the Storm. And Storm just didn't show up on the day.
Well, first half at least.
First half, I guess it was sort of one there, but even in the second half, they just seemed a bit toothless in their attack, and that's not taking anything away from Sydney Roosters. Their defence has been impeccable all season. It's probably why, it is the reason why they were minor premiers, and, Trent Robinson as well. The coach has said that that's been a focus of theirs all year, despite having the likes of Cooper Cronk, James Tedesco as part of a pretty strong spine, with Luke Keary and Jake Friend there. But the defence has been impeccable all year for the Roosters, and that's why they probably were the better team on the day. But the Storm, it just seems so uncharacteristic from them, given that they're so clinical, and in these big games that they're so strong. And the likes of Cameron Smith, and then Billy Slater's last game as well. A bit sad to see him go out on a losing note, but credit to the Roosters for getting the job done.
You do have to wonder, without taking a spotlight off the Roosters, how much that tribunal affair with Slater really impacted on preparations. Took up a good half a week there, having to go to and from Melbourne and Sydney, but that shouldn't be put in front as the reason why Melbourne dropped it. Roosters simply took them on at their own game and blew them off the park, and probably rallied around that inspiration from Cooper Cronk to almost vindicate his bravery to get himself up there when he was putting probably quite a lot of long-term well-being at stake.
Oh yeah, broken or fractured shoulder or whatever in the end. Shoulder blade was the injury that he sustained from the prelim the week earlier. So to play like that, he wasn't even playing out there. He could barely throw the ball. He was merely just like a second coach on the field. So, that's where the credit, I guess, has to go more so to Luke Keary, doing the role of a 5'8" and a half-back as well, doing filling in Cronk's position as well. But Cronk being the field general, if you will, and I guess ultimately what the premiership does is vindicate the decision to get Cronk and James Tedesco over, because they've both been star players, and I guess if they didn't win this premiership, you would have asked a lot of questions about Trent Robinson as a coach, having these big name players come over, and in the end it vindicates everything that the Roosters have done in the preseason, and to win the premiership as well. Sadly, Melbourne denied the opportunity to have a back-to-back as well.
Oh, 2 flags now for Trent Robinson in 6 seasons, so he's certainly cemented his place in that legacy. And for the Storm, they're so often there in the final game of the season, but again, they seem to come up short when it counts, so they'll be frustrated. They haven't been able to convert all of these appearances, and nevertheless, they should be back next season with a hopeful transition there. Smith can be convinced to hang around for one more year at least, with Slater now hanging up the boots, and just continue that seamless transition to the next generation, and you hope they've been able to really absorb from the best over the past decade, really, and they continue on a new chapter.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess you could probably talk about Smith and the likes of Cameron Munster in the grand final. Cameron Munster had a dog of a game completely. He was in the sin bin twice, and then when you look at the stats as well, Cameron Smith didn't even get a single run all game. So when Smith doesn't get a run, you know something is wrong. So yeah, just didn't live up to the thriller that we had hoped it to be. Two of the best teams of the modern era finished first and second on the table, of course, as well. But yeah, it was the Roosters who won the minor premiership that went on to clinch that premiership too. And I guess for Boyd Cordner as well, the captain of the Roosters, it's been a sensational year, given that he was the Origin winning captain for New South Wales, winning captain for the premiership with the Sydney Roosters, and now, given Greg Inglis's little indiscretion during the week, Boyd Cordner will be captain of the national team as well when they play their tests against Tonga and New Zealand at the end of the year. So, he's had a remarkable season too, you could say.
And the monkey off the back of the Roosters as being a glamour club, they've proven now that they can get the job done.
Yeah, exactly. So another year of footy capped off. I guess, emphatic year for both codes as well, and hopefully next year we can see, I guess, a similar level of unpredictability and also excitement as well. And for me personally, it would be nice to see the Cowboys back up in there in the NRL. But yeah, for Collingwood, just hope they go from strength to strength next year as well, and hope they don't suffer a case of the West Coast Bulldogs did after their grand final win in 2016. So yeah.
Yeah, probably a bit of a time to reflect in that off-season between that and motorsport winding down. It's always nice to collect your breath and then go at it again 2019, and hopefully there's some more spectacular narratives which can be written.
I guess the positive thing about coming out of motorsport season and also footy season as well, that we've got the warmer weather coming, so that's going to be great. So no more waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning, freezing and whatnot. So there's a light at the end of the tunnel, even if it means we have to give up the racing for a few months anyway over the summer. But yeah, I guess that's it for this edition. So thanks for tuning in. We look forward to being back next week to wrap up whatever happens in Japan, of course, the Bathurst 1000 to talk about too. So yeah, it almost seems like, after this podcast, it's going to be winding down for the rest of the year, given the state of the F1 Championship as well, and could be wrapped up by the end of the month, you think. So yeah, I guess in reflection, there's plenty to discuss still, but yeah, we'll look forward to being back next week to talk about what's happened this weekend.
Yeah, bring it on until then.
Thank you very much.